to order and ask that our staff welcome and give us notices and closed caption information.
Good evening and welcome to the March 9th Citizen Public Safety Review and Appeals Board meeting. For anyone in the public who wishes to make a comment at this evening's meeting, please call area code 269-226-6573. Again, anyone wishing to make a public comment at this meeting this evening, please call 269-226-6573 and leave a voicemail message. That voicemail message, which is limited to 3 minutes, will be played back during the citizen comment period. Thank you. Currently, our streaming platforms do not offer the live closed caption. However, please note that these public meetings are recorded and upon conclusion are made available with closed caption for the hearing impaired. Thank you, Chairman Payne.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. We'll have the roll call now, please.
Sarah Buchanan, excused. Christopher Caldwell. Is present, I know. Luis Garcia.
Here.
Curtis Gardner.
Here.
Daniel Hamilton. Kim Hines Lipsey is excused. Oliver Howell.
Here.
Barbara Miller.
Here.
Vernon Payne.
Here.
Jaquise Robertson.
Here.
Susan Stapleton.
Here.
And Larry Tolbert is excused as well. City staff present are Deputy City Manager Patsy Moore, Chief Vernon Coakley, Assistant Chief Victor Green, our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director Dorla Bronner, and myself, Executive Assistant to the City Manager's Office.
Thank you, Ms. Vargas. Please note for the record that we do have a quorum and we have, so as we have several excused absences. You should have received an updated copy of our minutes in the second packet. And there were some minor corrections to those minutes. There were some dates, but nothing of critical substance, although the dates of the meeting aren't important, but they were corrected and placed in your packet. So do I hear any additions or edits for the minutes from any of the board? Hearing no additions or edits to the minutes, I will ask for a motion to approve and adopt the minutes as submitted.
So moved.
Second.
I second.
Did I hear a second? Thank you. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The yeas have it, so the minutes are adopted. We'll have an OIR update next on our agenda.
Good evening. ORI is going on, is rolling on with the review, independent review of the KDPS activities from last summer. They met with KDPS today, or is it tomorrow? Well, they have one more meeting with KDPS and then a meeting with some of the leaders. I spoke with Mike Janarco from ORI, and he did mention that wanted me to reach out to you on, say if any of you wanted to communicate with him your experience on last year, your thoughts, please do so. We will resend that information if you need it. But that is all I have at this time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next, we have the review of the 2021 complaints PCRs received. I assume that would.
Yep. Good evening, Chairman Payne and the rest of the members and Chief Coakley. Yes, we were able to put our PCR complaints on our transparency page. So if you go to City of Kalamazoo, And scroll down, you will see that Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety have a transparency page. If you go to Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety, it will link you right over to it. There are 2 PDFs forms, kind of like in a Excel spreadsheet. One is for January complaint. We have 1 complaint in January. We have the complaints into categories. One is what the complaint type of the complaint, the number, so the PCR number, what month it occurred, complaints by zones. As you know, that Kalamazoo is divided into 7 zones, and we have other outside zone, and we divided also by race and ethnicity, gender, and then it goes all the way across to the current status, whether it's open or closed, and if whatever the findings may be. So once the case is closed, we will also put the findings in. So we had 1 in January, we should be having that one come to a close very soon. And we had 5 in the month of February. And most of them came late February. And if you go to open up the second Excel sheet, it will show the list, as I mentioned earlier, the complaint, the PCR number, the zone, the race, the gender, and the status of the case. We will continue to add each month as we get it into the onto the transparency page. Either you can get it through the Kdbs website or through the city's website. Chairman, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Chief
Yes,
Green, can
Yes.
you provide the board with a summary of the complaints received in February?
Yes, I have I don't have a complete summary of it. I can give you an overall summary because we're still investigating.
Sure.
One was a complaint that came in unprofessional. Complaint number 2 and number 4 was unprofessional. The complaint was rudeness or disrespect. The second one was dealing with damage to the door. I just know a little as we investigated, but is a damage to a door as the officer was knocking on the door. There's a complaint that a person didn't feel that they was lawfully arrested. And the other one was an improper investigation that happened back in 2019 that the person's coming back that we're doing a thorough investigation on. Indeed, then the fourth one, or the last one in February, was dealing with when a person was arrested, complained of an injury and said that we failed to provide medical attention to the person after being arrested.
And all of those are still open at this point.
They are all still open, being investigated, correct?
And Chairman Payne and board, we will in the future provide a link on your agenda to this document.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Green. A couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Will you be, in our next agenda item, will you be going over the PCR complaints for 2020 as a part of your annual review, or had that not been a plan that you guys were going to provide that information to us?
Yes, we will not be able to provide the complete 2020 review until late April. I think we mentioned earlier, the last meeting, that we transferred into a new system, and we had to make a long story short, we had to manually go through the complaints. So we're completing the Office of Professional Standards annual report by the end of April. That gives you the complete process for the whole year of 2020.
A couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
In compiling this information, it's aggregated, and then it's broken down by category.
Correct.
And I'm sure that somewhere in the process, individuals who amass complaints, you're keeping track of that. And I don't know the efficacy of providing the board with not the name, but individual officers who are amassing complaints. And then that would open the door for the questions from the board. What is the process for us to deal with officers who are amassing complaints across in a manner that's seems to be more than any of our other officers? Does that question make sense to you?
I think what you're saying is that to provide information that the officers receive more than one complaint or several complaints.
Yes,
Am I understand that correctly?
Yes.
yes.
Okay. Chief, I don't know if you want to add anything to that at all. But-
And I think Chairman Payne has indicated that the board is not looking for names of
No.
employees.
Okay,
However, some identification that if there is an officer that's amassing multiple complaints, the board would like to be made aware of that trend.
we also have, and yes, I understand that completely, and also with our new system that we're going to, it also gives us an early warning system. So it tells us that if the officer receives so many complaints in a certain amount of time, is automatically flagged to look at that officer. So that's why we're really excited about going to this new system that we have. So to answer your question, and Chief has raised his hand, so go ahead, Chief.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Payne, distinguished group. I'd just like to add to that on the early warning system. So the Office of Professional Standards is alerted to that. Once alerted that a particular officer has now have been taken in so many, it's going to be, we will set that number as a staff where the early warning system will begin. Either 2 or 3 complaints on that particular officer. And once that comes about, then the Office of Professional Standards then will have a conversation with the Assistant Chief of Operations, that's Assistant Chief Huber, have that conversation, put a plan in place about what particular issue this particular officer is having. Is he that particular person, officer, doing their job, or is this something more in depth? And then that particular plan is then disseminated down to the captain of operations, into the lieutenant's office, that particular platoon that officer belongs to. So the command staff is aware of what that officer is and where he or she is and what's going on. And more particular, to give the plan of action for corrective behavior before it gets out of hand. And so that's what's important. So there's a plan put in place, the officer is brought in, and I'm speaking of if it's wrong, right? Maybe it's not, but if there's something that we need to identify, we want to inform, educate the officer, and correct the behavior before anything gets out of hand. If it's an egregious situation, we have to act right away on the first situation where we have to do corrective behavior. Yes,
Thank you, Chief Coakley. I raised the question because I believe it was a year ago, we had one of our board members who had encountered a particular officer, and that particular officer name came across the board a couple of times. And the board has the ability and the responsibility to request through the city manager's office that a particular officer be investigated. And so I'm trying to find a way for the board, as a part of your process, to be informed about those types of situations as they exist or come to exist. Had it not been for that particular board meeting, I'm not so sure that the board would have made that request of the city manager. So in short, I'm just trying to figure out a way so that there is a trigger in the process that alerts the board that this is something that you may be wanting to take a look at.
Absolutely. So to your point, Chairman Payne, with the early warning system and the report out of transparency without the officer's name, that information, the aggregate data will be compiled for this particular group to see that Officer X has an issue, and we need to identify that, and we'll do so properly.
Ms. Stapleton, please.
Yes. So I've found the chart on the website, and so it's fairly easy to navigate to and to find. So number one, I think it looks great, but and I already see of most of the complaints that have occurred in Zone 5, which already is probably telling you something about where these complaints are coming from. But the one question I do have is that because of the complaint type you have, it's listed as unprofessional or unprofessionalism. That's really a broad-based category. I don't know if there's more definition that could be given to that category than just unprofessionalism, because it's, unprofessional in terms of actions toward a person, or just, someone noticed an officer, out and about in doing things that they didn't think were professional. So it's hard to think about what that really means in terms of a complaint.
Thank you, Ms. Stapleton, for that question. And so it is a broad term, and it's used to describe, as you mentioned, a litany of possible behaviors by the officer. But the Office of Professional Standards will then drill down into that, interviewing the victim, the complainant, and ask what specifically was the action of the officer.
Okay.
And in doing so, that is then specifically drilled down to, and then open to the officer. And the questions then are posed by professional standards are toward that action. And then we comprise that data and information to come up with a summary of findings for the officer's behavior, whether he's exonerated, it's unfounded, sustained, not sustained, or just purely withdrawn or unfounded. So those are a list of the results of the disposition, but more importantly, to your question, the specific behavior is drilled down in the questioning of the complainant and the officer.
Great, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Stapleton, thank you for that question. And that ties directly to an issue that we have discussed as a board in the past. We had asked if it was possible for our officers to document the stops that they make of our citizens. And so if an officer stops a citizen for a particular reason, we wanted that information documented, and we wanted, based upon the officer's perception, the race of that individual. And this is for our entire Kdps department in our city. And what that would do would give us an indication as to the racial and ethnicity breakdown of citizens who are being stopped. And that may also provide important information to the chief and our assistant and deputy chiefs to address some of those stops, especially if, as you point out, most of those are occurring in Zone 5. Mm-hmm. I don't know if we're at that point yet where we have the capacity to do that, but that was a request that was made, Ms. Stapleton, and I appreciate your question. Mm-hmm. Yes, Chief.
If I may address that, Chairman Payne, we do have a contact log that officers fill out for traffic stops, and that demographic data is collected in that and that contact log. So we have that data. We are looking to have a future meeting with this group to talk about how to disseminate this information publicly.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And not just on the traffic stop part, but on any stop that an officer would make. And whether there is an arrest made or not, we're trying to get at the proclivity for our officers to make, to address unintended bias. I will put it that way. Something that they may not even be aware of that's occurring, but it could be occurring. And so
I think that's where we were challenged with the request, in that it was elevated to any interaction that a public safety officer has with a citizen. And that really challenged us to have data for any interaction with a member of the public.
Well, that would be very broad, but a stop for cause might narrow it down a little bit. Okay. But because sometimes citizens don't understand why they're being stopped, and there are some issues there, probably on both sides. But I echo that to express my appreciation for Ms. Stapleton's question. Moving on, you provide data, 2020 data, PCR data on the 17% of the allegations that were sustained. And you break that down into categories that you described as relatively minor on the sustained complaints. My question is, why don't we keep the data on the exonerated and unsustained, not sustained complaints? I think it would be very beneficial for the board to have that data as well, and to track whether or not that data compares to the data that you're collecting on the 17% of the allegations that were sustained. Perhaps some of those allegations that were not sustained or exonerated are at the extreme. I don't know. I don't want to make that assumption, but I do know that that data would be very helpful to the board, along with the racial and ethnic breakdown. Does that make sense to you, Chief and Assistant Chief?
Yeah, taking notes here, Chairman Payne, to capture that information that you're looking for, or the board is looking for. Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions on the PCR reports, either 2020 or 2021? Board members?
I have a quick question. So first, I love the transparency in providing that demographic breakdown of the complaints. And I'm also happy to hear about the flagging system around complaints as well. I guess my question is a little bit, or more so centered around that system, because it seems like the flagging occurs due to like a volume of complaints. Is there a way that you would be able to like catch if like a grievous act happened, but it was a one-time occurrence, if that makes any sense?
Well, we have a check. Chief, you want to say something?
Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
We do have a check and balance system in place where it goes through different layers, as you may know. So if there is something that was terrible that occurred, it would be flagged early. The way you there? The way that the early system worked, the early warning system worked also is not determined by necessarily the volume. We set a particular number that once the officer received those complaints, it automatically red flags us and so we have to look into these different complaints. So it might be, we will set the complaint and Officer Green, such as myself or PSO Green, would reach a complaint of 3 complaints. We automatically will, the system will flag us to look at those 3 complaints that he received.
Ms. Robinson, let me say this, if I may. You said a one-time egregious situation.
Yes.
This is 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has this. Everybody has this. And when we show up, everybody shows up to a situation. Not only that, in each and every contact, our officers are mandated by policy to turn those cameras on, those body cameras. Okay. And so when we are in a situation that we are reacting to behavior out in our community, and to mitigate situations, and there's a situation that happens such as egregious to that shocks the conscience, that people are going to let us know. Our community is going to let us know, and it's going to be recorded. And again, the officer's body camera is going to record that action as well. So to your question, ma'am, that information, this is 2021, people are going to capture that. People are going to come out and talk about it and tell public safety. But again, on that check and balance, the officer's body camera should be activated and shall be activated, in order to capture that data as well. So that's how that particular situation should.
Thank you for that question, Ms. Robertson. Chief, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me, Chairman Payne?
Now I can, yes, thank you.
Oh, yeah, you're froze up, sir.
Okay. taking that situation, what are the incentives for the officer to turn on his body cam or the surveillance systems in the cars? And if they don't turn those on, that's an accountability that officers have to turn that on. If they don't turn that on, and perform that accountability, what are the consequences?
Okay. So you asked, what are the incentives? That is a mandate by policy. That can be as progressive discipline for not turning that body camera on. The street supervisors, the sergeants, are in charge of going to these scenes of where our officers are proactively, actively going to mitigate situations in our community. That's a check and balance system that we have for the officers that are street supervisors, along with the lieutenants, the shift lieutenants, to check and gauge on what the sergeants are doing and what the PSOs are doing. If the officer fails to activate his or her body camera, again, that's progressive discipline up and including to termination. Okay, that is the situation that we have at hand. It is mandated, to your question, Chairman Payne, it is mandated by policy that any contact by a public safety officer with a citizen, that body camera shall be activated.
Thank you. That's important because we have had cases come before the board where the body camera was not activated. And that was a principal concern in our conversations, private conversations. They can't be public, of course, in terms of how we were going to arrive at a decision on that particular case. So I just wanted to get your input in terms of our all understanding that information is critical when it comes to what the board is being asked to do.
Yes,
Ms. Moore, you have a comment?
Yes. Chief, back to Ms. Robertson's question. When you talk about early indicators, those are not solely based on the number of incidents. Those are other behaviors or things that you notice that might infer that an officer, there may need to be some further looking or investigation into an officer. So it's not solely based on the number of incidents or complaints. Is that correct?
That's correct, Deputy City Manager Moore. That is correct. Officers can do their job properly, and people disagree how that job was done and file a complaint. And those can rack up. The officer can just be purely doing their job. But once, again, when you start digging down, drilling down to what the complaint is, and you speak with the complainant, and you look at the body camera information, okay? And so to your point, Chairman Payne, if that body camera isn't on, we have an issue, okay? So, but we're still bringing the officer in, and we're gonna have an interview, okay? And again, that's progressive discipline up to including to termination.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other comments? Our next agenda item is the Kdbs 2020 annual report review.
And while Chief is getting ready, just again reminding you, this is not your annual report. We are waiting on that PCR data to insert into your annual report. So then we will publish your annual report. But this is the department's annual report.
So to that point, Chairman Payne and illustrious members of C-SCRAP, we know what 2020 entailed for the city of Kalamazoo. We're talking about COVID. We're talking about civil unrest in our community, how we created dialogue and collaboration with the community, having conversations, discussions, some good, some bad, where we just didn't listen to one another. What a year. I don't, that's all I can frame it as. And what we learn, there are a lot of specific things that we learn. And as I spoke in front of this body about listening, changing, transparency, we did some good things. But in 2021, we're going to continue to learn from our mistakes, be more transparent, be more open, collaborate more, and to moving into this new year. And tonight, I'm not sure if this is a spot I should go into this, but tonight again, this is a collaboration of what we're doing. We're talking about the mobile nuisance party early. Okay, early. Enough's enough, community. Enough's enough about the mobile nuisance party, and so commonly referred to as the X train in our community. And so tonight we're collaborating with the community about suggestions, about problem solving. How do we change? What do we do? How can we help one another? Because we have to come together to fix this. We can no longer continue to say it's your problem. It's our problem. So, first and foremost, we want to continue to inform and educate before we begin to do, the prosecution and things of that nature. It's important for us to do that on the front end. And so this is the things that we're moving forward to have learned from the past without we being on an island. So I'll stop there to listen, but if you have any specific questions about the 2020 year-end report. Ms. Miller,
Ms. Miller, was your hand raised, Ms. Miller?
Yes, yes. I wondered how our city compares with other cities of sort of like size in terms of homicide and in terms of officer complaints. Is there any kind of comparison anywhere about that?
We often look at that, Ms. Miller, how we trend with our neighboring cities of a population of our size. Many times, depending, it just depends on the year of what goes on the homicides. In particular, the last 2 years, we know what COVID has done, especially in 2020, when the world stopped, that homicide rate went up. But again, and spinning off into our GVI, that our group violence intervention technique, during the pandemic of 2020, the criminal justice system, if you will, stop and to hold people accountable for their actions was less than available for us in the summer of 2020. And, before, we could hold some, or be target specific in our group violence intervention with our community partners in doing that, but they were releasing people because of the COVID situation in the jail. And then we were dealing with that same particular individual with gun violence in our community again. And if I could just springboard off into that, the summer's coming, but here we are in March, and our group violence intervention technique is working beautifully with our community outreach programs, with making sure that those who are particularly in our community causing that type of trauma are held accountable. And I'm thankful for that with our partners, public safety, the community at large, that we together are working toward what's better right now as gun violence has come down. And I'm very hesitant to talk about coming down and those things because it can surely spike up in a moment's notice. But I just like to give kudos to those who are in our community in the outreach. Oh my God, his name escapes me right now, and I apologize. Michael, thank you. Michael Wilder thank you, Dorla. Michael Wilder is just doing such an just an outlandish job of bringing those young men that are in leadership in these particular groups to bring them together, to talk about the trauma, to talk about what's occurring in our community and how it is disrupting our beautiful and our strong city. And many of you know Michael Wilder and his social service or his social media avenue and his posts and how that's beautifully done. So this is how community works. This is how we change things when we come together and we talk with one another and we have dialogue and problem solve of getting better. In particular, I'll talk about just a second that one young man was about to be federally indicted. And we got word of that. And this young man was caught with in two different situations on a given night with weapons in a vehicle. He was about to be federally indicted. We reached out with Michael Wilder and other resources and talked to that young man. He came to the table and talked about changing again and being on the right side and doing the right things and talking to others that follow him in group violence. We got word of that. We talked to the federal prosecutor and asked that we pocket that and not prosecute him at this time. Because of what his actions are and what he's doing better for the community. This is how we change. This is what makes us better. Now, something different happens, and I don't want to go into that, but I'm just saying this was an opportunity for us to show a good faith for a young man who was having problems and issues in his life, but to have our community come together and stop a federal prosecution because he was facing 10 years of federal prosecution. And that means he gets all 10 years. So he is an ally for our GVI process and our community moving forward. So we're excited to have relationships like this. And these are the things that we're doing within the community. So thank you for that, Ms. Miller.
Well, I just want to say I appreciate the report. It's very detailed. I love all the community partners that you highlighted and how much our community is doing. And I'd like to just put a banner across Kalamazoo and show the good things that we do every day, every year. I love the Ministers Program, Urban Alliance. All those people are just doing good work. And you're right, the COVID really cut that short a lot of places, but we're back up and running, I hope soon.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Chief, I just want to make note that in your the strategic plan for the department from 2019 to 2021, the things that you have discussed were in place. But I want to compliment the department and your leadership on strategically involving individuals who have negative experiences with the department in the way that you solve the issue. That was a strategic shift that I noted under your leadership. The goals were still there. The GVI intervention has been there for a long time. But I think the way that you went about implementing that and the emphasis that you put on engaging those who were impacted negatively by those experiences was strategic. So I want to point that out. That was not an accident. That was not something that just happened. That was very, very strategic. And the other thing I would say is that it addresses the system. And we know that we have to address the system as much as we have to address those relationships with individuals and groups. It's the system that oftentimes creates the issues, which leads to another point, Chief. As we look at the X-train problem, I think one of the things that we can do, despite COVID, is to look at the system and see if there are systemic barriers that prevent us from keeping people safe in their neighborhoods. And that system includes Kdbs, it includes the court, it includes the prosecutor's office. And I think that as a community, if we attack those systems and do what we have to do in those systems so that people in District 5 feel as safe and as protected as people elsewhere in our community, That is systemic. And so I would encourage you to make another strategic shift in that regard. If you could for a moment, though, highlight what's going on with your KSOC program. And that's the Kalamazoo Strategic Operations Center program. And I say that because part of what the community needs to know and part of being transparent is understanding our operations and who's accountable for what happens when things go south and how that flows through our operations center, how decisions are being made, and ultimately, who does the community look to for accountability? We all know, Chief, that without consequences, there are no accountabilities. It's meaningless. And so there has to be the accountability, the consequences, and how that all fits together in your strategic operations center. Please.
Thank you, Chairman Payne. Thank you for that opportunity. So we have the Division of Investigations, and that is headed by Deputy Chief David Boyson. And in doing so, back in 2017, we began as a staff to attempt to figure out how can we become, because of this new intel and avenues of social media, in ways that is unimaginable, the internet, how people communicate. Then Chief Thomas brought on a strategic analyst. We hired 3 at the time, and we brought them into what is called the KSOC. And that in itself became a strategic place, a position for intel, information, for us to be target specific about those in our community that is creating the trauma and chaos. How could we drill down? Because we no longer wanted to do the shotgun approach. That is in line with the 21st century in policing. That is in line with that, and the pillars of being servant leaders. And so the Miss Millers, the Miss Robesons, the Miss Bonners, the Miss Stapletons, the Mr. Gardners were not affected by law enforcement taking that shotgun approach and including you in that trauma and just doing that. So that Strategic Operations Center was put together in order to be target specific, to know who's doing what and how they're doing it. And then we using covert and overt proactive and directed patrols to go to those areas using that intelligence to get out and do the work within our community and be target specific. Who's held accountable is important. And if the criminal justice system has a breakdown, we can't hold those. And we walk through that story. But more importantly, bringing the information, creating the cases through the investigations division, talking with our community, collaborating, why, what, where, why, and how people that are creating the trauma in the community can be held accountable for that. And then presenting the right case to the prosecutor or the city attorney in order to hold them accountable, to place them in front of the judicial system to move forward. In the end, to keep this city safe, I am held accountable as your chief of public safety. I am that person. And again, I look forward and I thank you for the opportunity to serve in this capacity. And so I look forward as the summer gets warmer, that we can, and COVID lessons and the restrictions as we become vaccinated, that we can collaborate more and walk together in this community together. Because I'm gonna call on all of you. We're gonna walk this together. We're stronger together, and we're divided if we don't do that. So thank you for the opportunity, Chairman Payne.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, Ms. Stapleton.
So again, I think the report's very nicely done. Again, highlighting so many of the great things that are happening. A lot of reference to COVID, right? So both things that have impacted, but things we can learn from COVID. One of the cautionary tales, though, is as we go down the line years from now, we tend to compare year to year to year without necessarily understanding the influences of what happened in that year. And so I think it's just always very important to remember that there may have been implications because of COVID, but there may have been opportunities because of COVID, and to learn from both, right? And then how is that documented, right? How do we document that? Because it's not always in the numbers, but there are things that we've learned as a result of COVID that we want to continue, and we just need to make sure that that's well documented and verified.
Thank you, Steve. Any other comments?
Yes, I
Thank
want
you.
to. We lost a lot of departures. I mean, you lost 26 people, and to be doing what you're doing is outstanding. Because it looks like, as I'm looking at them, there's some experience there that you lost. I mean, that was years and years of experience. And so to keep doing what we're doing, I just want to commend you, because that's not easy when you lose that senior leadership. So keep doing it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Green,
Chairman,
Assistant Chief.
Chairman, yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to add something else. And although I started back in public safety in November 2020, one of the things I was really excited when the chief, when I came back and got sworn in under the chief vision, is that to be even more transparent, he reorganized the department and put community affairs under one umbrella, and he hired 2 civilians to help us be more transparent. One is a community collaborator, and her responsibility to work closely with the department, the community police and everything. And she brings such a wonderful civilian lens to when she's invited to all the executive meetings, and she has feedback, and she's at the table. So she helps us be more transparent in the community and with different programming activities. The other one is that we also hired our first public information officer under the chief vision, and how he is able to not only help us tell our story, but even tell our story more effectively, educating. We come up with this wonderful thing called, I'm drawing a blank on the Education Tuesday, where every Tuesday our CPOs and other officers give an educational tip about safety, and is broadcast to our social media. We are very excited. This month is Women's History Month, so we're highlighting not only public safety sworn officers, but encouraging people to participate, to consider public safety as a career. So we're bringing in some of our analysts, and what is it like to be a woman, and not only in law enforcement, but on the fire side and everything. So we're very excited about what 2021 is bringing, not only from a public safety or sworn officer view, but also we're bringing such as your board and other civilians to the table to improve our transparency.
Thank you, Chief Green. Any other comments before we move on? Thank you. Review the activity tracker. Any updates on that tracker?
No significant updates, Chairman Payne. As you know, we are getting ready to go live with your website in early April, and you've been corresponding back and forth about your business cards. Beyond that, there are no significant updates that we have to share this evening.
Thank you. Any subcommittee reports? Okay, thank you. Hearing none, we'll move on to board member comments. Any board member comments? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to citizens' comments. Any citizens' comments that have come in?
There are no citizen comments at this time.
Thank you. I will circle back, and I have just one comment to make. As Chief has been able to build out his team. And as Member Gardner has commented, has done a phenomenal job with many of the veteran officers leaving the force. But I want to comment on the most recent promotion of Deputy Chief Boyson. I have had the opportunity and privilege of being on patrol day and night, and during the Proud Boy incident with Dave Boyson. And I've been in his office on several times, on several occasions. And I've gone through literature and books that he is reading and has shared with me. Chief, I want to tell you, that was an excellent choice. That was an excellent choice. Chief Boyson has a heart for the community. He has a heart for the department. He's focused on what needs to happen. He understands the damage that systemic violence can do to our community. He gets it. And so I just want to commend you on that promotion. You're building a heck of a team. And I think that should be noted. Dave Boyson was a wonderful selection, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Payne.
Upcoming meetings, March 17th. It's a closed session with new member orientation. April 13th is our next board meeting, followed by May 11th.
And Chairman Payne, just a reminder that on the orientation, all members are invited should you choose to join us.
Yes. And I want to tell you that it is now 3:53 a.m. where I am. And it's warm and it's glorious and I'm enjoying myself. So I'm in Abu Dhabi. So
I was asked. Wow.
visiting my grandchildren and my daughter and my son-in-law and just having a wonderful time here. It's fantastic. So with that said, if there are no other comments, I will bid everybody adieu and wish you well. Thank you.
Good evening.
Bye.
evening,
Good night.
everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, Coach.
See you. Well done.
Night.